To the panel, that Newspoll that I mentioned earlier, it's huge. It wasn't just that support for the Voice is at a record low. The poll also showed that the government is sinking with it. The Liberals, for the first time since the election, on a higher primary vote than Labor. Although after preferences, the government still has a healthy lead, 53 to 47. It's down from what it was, but still healthy. But it's not just the Voice, you see, that's killing the government here. Because it seems almost everything's going wrong at the moment. The cost of living crisis, government's equally crazy, global warming schemes, threatening now with us with blackouts. The government's sweetheart deal with Qantas to block extra flights from Qatar, keeping international tickets high. I mean, the big flight centre group has even now run ads demanding the government let Qatar have those flights to drive down prices.
The whispers around our industry are that it came from the top, from the PM, to knock it on the head. And so he can presumably review it and reverse it.
The Prime Minister today actually denied that and insisted he hasn't had secret talks with Qantas ahead of banning Qatar.
Did the Prime Minister discuss the Qatar application with Mr Alan Joyce prior to the government's decision?
I've gone through the one substantive conversation that I had, and I've said that was not with Qantas, and I received no lobbying from Qantas about this issue. I can't be clearer. I can't be clearer than that.
Joining me is Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal President, Steve Conroy, former Labor Senator and Cabinet Minister. Steve, the Voice now seems dead.
Well, it's been on a 6-8 month downward trend from the high 50s, low 60s, almost 12 months ago. And it will take a lot of campaigning, which is just starting to crank up. I mean, if you look at the volunteers, if you look at the signs starting to go up around the country, you look at the door knocking that's planned. So there's a long way to go before I'm giving up on this. I'm still hopeful. But the signs at the moment are that it looks like it will lose. But I've started as underdog before in campaigns and won. So I think the Voice aren't giving up.
6 weeks to go, though.
Well, Andrew, look, the more people know about the Voice, the less likely they are to vote for it. They're not going to vote for something that Albanese hasn't read, that he can't explain, that the authors of don't even know how long it is, that's going to start a debate in this country which will go for a decade over reparations, truth-telling, a treaty. This will go, if you like the Voice, vote for us, because this will go for a decade. And they don't want to divide our country permanently by race forever. The other thing I'd say is this, Andrew. The Aboriginal leadership in this country, many people have been advising governments for decades, now say all of that was wrong. All of the billions of dollars that you Australian taxpayers have spent on all the advice we've given the government, we were wrong. I only needed a voice to fix all this. There is a growing suspicion that too many Aboriginal leaders are too wealthy, too coiffured, living in Sydney and Canberra, whilst people are starving on the streets of Alice Springs, escaping domestic violence and alcoholism. And the Aboriginal elite, people aren't listening to them because they're the people who've been advising governments in this country for generations, and the Australian public are saying, no, you've had long enough. You've botched it so far. We're not listening to any more extreme proposed changes to the Australian Constitution.
Well, you look at one of the man probably who did most of the drafting of the Uluru Statement, Noel Pearson. He's had about $550 million.
Where's it gone? Where's that money gone, Andrew?
What's it done?
$500 million in Cape York Peninsula?
About 3,500 people.
Where's it gone?
Well and truly. No, I don't get it. But it's more than the Voice, isn't it, really, Steve? I mean, I'm getting anecdotal evidence that people are more bothered at the moment, or a lot of people are bothered by the Qatar decision to block those flights. The government now has Labor Party President Wayne Swan saying he wants an inquiry. You've got a couple of Labor states now demanding the decision be reversed. So prices fall, more tourists come in, helps everyone. How did the government get it so wrong?
Look, firstly, let's be clear. As Albo said, he's not spoken with Qantas. So Qantas have not come in to see him. He hasn't spoken to them about this decision ultimately. well, Qantas' position is always Qantas' position. We want everything and everyone else can have nothing. That's normal corporate behaviour, okay? But let's be clear, there is no fix been put in because Qantas, Alan Joyce picked up the phone to his mate Albo. So let's just put that aside. There is no evidence.
Mate Albo did not say no to it.
Unless the Prime Minister is telling a blatant lie to the Australian public, which I don't believe he's doing. So let's just put that aside. Secondly, as has been pointed out today, Qatar can increase the amount of people coming into those places by upgrading and putting bigger planes on. So they don't need extra slots to bring more people. They've got plenty of bigger planes. They just choose not to use them. Okay, so they've got plenty more people can come to Australia on Qatar Airlines without any extra slots whatsoever.
No, but I've heard the Prime Minister say, well, look, it's okay if they could go to Canberra or they could go to Adelaide. I mean, that's not where they want to go. They want to go to Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne.
You know, Andrew, apart from that particular issue, there's a smell of the Whitlam government starting around about Albanese.
Michael.
Opening too many fronts, losing control of the public debate, and that's what they've done. They're losing the debate on Qantas, they've lost the debate on The Voice, they're losing the debate on industrial relations changes, they've got the whole community offside by the lack of interest in cost of living reforms. Cost of living, a cost that people are bleeding. They can't pay their mortgages. They can't pay for household items. The government is showing, that we're not really interested. We're just obsessed with The Voice. And this is what happened from the Whitlam government. They lost control of the debate. They got the community offside. They're obsessed by their own internal machinations. And they lost the trust and confidence of the electorate. And you look at what's happening with Albanese, his personal approval rating gone from, plus 26 to -1 in the blink of an eyelid. Labor's vote now going down. The government is now disconnected from the working middle class and from their own supporters. And so whilst I'm not predicting the government defeat by any stretch, there's a long way to go. You're certainly seeing this government showing early signs of decay, and that decay is deep-seated, Andrew, because they're focused on things extraneous to what the public's interested in, and that is always bad for a government.
Yeah, I heard you scoffing there when the analogy with the Whitlam government.
Seriously.
So can I just put this parallel? The government seems intoxicated by various ideological crusades and a little bit arrogant. So it's pushed too hard on global warming and too hard on The Voice, too much too soon. And it isn't focused on what's really bothering people.
Let's be clear. I accept that at the moment there's a perception that the government has been too focused on The Voice. Interest rates have gone up. So if you want to do a tracking of when did The Voice start going down, about the same time as interest rates started going up. And there's been a few graphs in a few newspapers to demonstrate that. So the Australian public are sending a message. They're saying, we want you to be focused on, the issues that are hurting us and what you're going to do about them. I think that's absolutely a fair interpretation. I think The Voice will be completed in 6 weeks. And, I'm optimistic. I remain optimistic and hopeful that it can get up, but it doesn't look likely at the moment. But the challenge then is to get a focus on the things that we've already done to provide relief in terms of energy, other plans that the government have got to put on the table to try and relieve that.
The statistics are, even with the relief that's been offered, people paying more still. Even when you add that was the latest inflation figures.
But let's be clear, the decisions to close down coal mines and coal power fire stations were taken under the Liberals. Labor is inheriting this debacle.
You might recall that I was attacking the Liberals for the global warming.
And that is fair,
right?
You were making that.
So it's really a bipartisan failing. Just quickly, Michael, you sprung to public attention as a young solicitor, workplace reforms, trying to challenge them. Now, on another front, the government's buying a lot more trouble on industrial relations reform, like criminalising what it calls wage theft, things like that, legislation introduced today. The government realises it's buying too many arguments. It's already said, today we'll put small business to one side. They won't be affected. We'll just, What's going on with these reforms?
So they're too extreme. Wage theft, an employer's liable for jail if they may have underpaid and should have known that they were underpaying, etc., etc.?
Deliberately.
No.
Deliberately
What's happening
is the
here
exact words.
I bet Albanese's had no time to spend on these reforms. Tony Burke's running amok with his friends at the ACTU. Albanese's paying no attention to this because he's obsessed with global warming and The Voice, of course, and he's going overseas. They've got to rein Burke back in because this is opening on too many, Labor opening, as I said, on too many fronts, and this is one of them. You know, the employer organisations are not what they were 30 years ago when Andrew Hay ran the...
They're finding The Voice now suddenly.
Oh,
notice.
Yeah.
A bit late.
Yeah, a bit late. Well, you know, when we have the BHP and Rio directors publicly publicly disclosing what they have personally given to the Voice campaign, then we can talk about that, Andrew.
Look, I'm sorry, I've run out of time, Stephen. I know you've got something to say. We'll come back to you on this topic next week. Michael Kroger, Steve Conroy, thank you both so much for your time.